Hey there! This is not a walkthrough of either of my most recent patches, but rather an explanation of what ties them together and what was my inspiration for both of these and where that came from. So it all started here in VCV Rack. So I was noticing a problem when I was making a track in VCV Rack in the new update. And that problem was that the Sec3 was outputting triggers rather than gates. You can see these really quick triggers, and I was used to the Sec3 outputting gates as it did in the older version. And so when you put that through an ADSR, you don't get a good envelope unless you have the attack be all the way down. And then you really just have an attack, or you just have a release envelope. That's kind of all you get. You don't have control over it because it's just a trigger. And I was finding ways around that, trying to figure out how to deal with that. And then someone pointed out on Reddit that there is a really simple solution to it. And that is in the right click menu, there is a clock pass-through button. And now it's actually outputting gates. You can see right here in the red, it's now outputting actual gates, high for a while, low for a while, 50-50 at this point. So I can make actual envelopes that actually have a decent rise to them on the attack phase. And then you can see I have a much more control over what my envelope looks like here. So for some reason, even though I always knew that clocks are gates or are triggers rather, depending on what way you're doing it, I didn't think about the fact that I could change those and see what that looks like besides just changing tempo, but actually changing the gate length of the clock and having that affect something. But because this Sec3 called it a clock pass-through, that got me thinking about what opportunities are there for that. So I went in and thought of using a square wave as my clock. Because now on my square wave, I have pulse width as something I can mess with. I can turn the pulse width down and have these shorter shorter envelopes because my gate now is a lot smaller. My gate now, you can see, whoopsies, there we go. My gate now, you can see in this red outlining around the yellow is variable. I can make it a wider gate, almost to touching, and then the release is hardly going to even be able to do it, its release. Or I can have that modulate. And of course, there's a modulation input for that. So that was my inspiration for what this track was all about right here. You can see there's a spot where I was tracking what's happening. The yellow line is actually my control voltage from my filter, and the blue line you can see is the changing gate widths. You can hear it best when it's set up like this. If I turn off the pulse width modulation, this is my main clock right here. Not very interesting, but when I toss in the pulse width modulation, it's being controlled from another row down here. Even those simple eighth notes sound interesting. So that's how I did it in VCV Rack. When I came over to my real life modular, I was trying to figure out how I was going to make this happen because I wanted to do it with real life as well. And I thought of, again, pulling out the square wave out of my mini brute and using the pulse width modulation on that as the clock. And it was going to end up being really complicated again. But then I remembered that we've got these great sequencing tracks down here. So instead of, I have the pitches for my main melody, I've got 12 steps of that in this first one, but then instead of using this as the gate, because I wanted them to be not connected together, I had the velocity track set to the gates. And then I've got 10 of them in this sequence that are being used. And you can see as I scroll through these, the first one's set at 12%, then 20, just kind of gradually increasing up until this one right here. This one right here is all set to all the way just tying to the next note. And then the 10th one I actually have off because I realized I want one that doesn't have a gate at all. I thought that would add some interest to it. And then I have this track set to randomly go. So I have happening, the pitch is going through, but a random length of gate for each note. So it sounds like this. And the other reason why I really wanted to do it with a separate track is it did let me do things like I can have the gates also change in a different order. Now it's just going forward and backwards. So that's that. It sounds like I bumped something out of tune, but I won't worry about that. But that's my inspiration for these two tracks, is exploring what it looks like to have pulse width modulation for the main clock that is powering things like the main VCA and the filter and things like that. So one in VC VRAC 2 and one in my real life modular. Hope you enjoyed.